So welcome everyone to the fall orientation for the Pittsburgh Regional Science and Engineering Fair. I am Nikki Wood, the fair director. So I'll be getting us started tonight, and I am joined by several of our best volunteers for the science fair. Janet Vukotic will be talking about safety review forms and common problems that come up with those. Chuck Vukotic, the chair of our JAC, will be talking about judging and ISEF. And Tom Conroy, also a member of our JAC, will be talking about what makes a great project. So I'm going to mute everybody's phones except for mine to preserve our sound quality while we talk. So tonight you see our schedule. I'll be getting us started and we'll be following through with the other individuals I just mentioned. We'll have some time for questions at the end. So a little overview of what everyone in my office does. We are called the STEM Programs Office. We do a lot more than just science fair. There are several other competitions that you can get your students involved in. Chain reaction contraption contest we do in partnership with Westinghouse Electric Company. Students will build a contraption which solves a problem through engineering methods and bring their contraption down to the Science Center to compete with other schools. That is open to high school students. The registration deadline is this Friday. So if you're thinking about getting involved in that, you want to give us a call or check out chainreactioncontest.org in the very near future. We also do the Future City competition, which is a SimCity-based engineering activity where students design cities of the future. That takes place in January, but that registration deadline is also coming up soon, October 14th. That contest is for middle school students, grades 6 through 8. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, check out futurecity.org/Pennsylvania-Pittsburgh or contact us at the Science Center. We also have on-site events coming up, including ChemFest, which will happen at the end of October, good for grades 3 through 12. We'll be celebrating National Chemistry Week. If you want to plan a field trip or come down to join us for some tables in the lobby and all through the building, learn some more about chemistry. We also have SciTech Festival coming up in November. That's good for grades 6 through 12. Also a really good field trip activity. We'll have a lot of workshops that you can have your class scheduled for. They'll learn lots about science and technology. A little further in the future, we have our Engineer the Future event, which will take place in February. That will also be an event with tables throughout the museum where students can learn more about a career in engineering and do some hands-on activities with engineers from around the area. So lots of fun things going on in the STEM Programs Office for you to get involved in. If you want any more information about any of those, please let me know and I can point you in the direction of the person who is in charge of that program. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about PRSEF. So we are open to students in grades 6 through 12 to compete for cash trips and scholarships in lots of different categories of study. Students will pick their topic. They will do all their research on their own. They will make a poster board and present it to judges from industry and universities throughout the city on the day of our fair, Wednesday, March 25th. Last year, we had 972 students registered from 106 different schools. We had over 600 judges and volunteers. So it was a great event, lots of participation from schools and the community. We're really looking forward to the fair in 2020. PRSEF is coming home to the Carnegie Science Center for the first time in its illustrious 81-year history. So we are very excited to host the event in our own space and very excited to have a new registration database for you to take some of the burden of the paperwork off of all of the teachers. So, as part of our affiliation with the Society for Science and the People, we are allowed to send students to both ISEF and Broadcom Masters. So ISEF is something Chuck will talk a lot more about later today, so I will not go into a whole lot of detail here, but it's a very high stakes, high prestige event for high school students. Broadcom Masters is for our middle school students. All of our first through third place category award winners are nominated to go to Broadcom Masters in the fall. Great experience for those middle school students. If you want more information about PRSEF after the event tonight, you can find me at pittsburghsciencefair.org. You can call me at the Science Center, 412-237-1534, or send me an email at PRSEF@carnegiesciencecenter.org. So that is it for our introduction. I'm going to talk about the new database. So I have a comparison of our old process and our new process up on the screen here. We have first redesigned the entire database from the bottom up to move it off of the SciTech Festival server, which is being retired by the Science Center, onto a new server, the STEMosphere.org server. There are a ton of other great resources there for you to check out while you are registering for PRSEF and managing your students. So your new URL is STEMosphere.org/PRSEF. That will take you to your login screen where you can do everything you need to do to register your school and yourself and your students. So last year you had to start from scratch every year. You had to sign up for a new user ID and a new password. You had to enter all of your school's information and all of your students' information, all of your information. In the new database, that information will be stored from one year to the next, so you will not have to create a new account and recreate all that information. Last year, we had you fill out all of your forms on paper and mail them to us or deliver them to us down at the Science Center if your package was too big to mail. This year, all of your registration forms and your safety review forms, so Form 1 and 1A and 1B and research plans, will all be submitted electronically. So no more snail mail. Last year, we would have multiple reviews from our scientific review committee. We would send your paperwork back and you would have to mail new paperwork. This year, we have checks in place within the system you're going to use to fill out the forms to prevent a lot of the more common errors we saw in previous years and to hopefully increase the speed with which we can get those projects approved. So the projects will all be reviewed electronically, and you will be able to access the results of those project reviews electronically through the database rather than waiting for me to send you an update email with a copy of my spreadsheet. So hopefully this will streamline the process and make it a lot easier for all of you teachers who are trying to manage large groups of students and keep track of who is approved and who is not approved and who has filled out which form. So when you go to STEMosphere.org/PRSEF, you will see a page that looks like this. This is where you will log in. So before you can log in, you need to register. So the first step you're going to take is to click that big red register button down at the bottom of the screen, which will take you to a screen that looks like this, where you can add your first name, last name, and email address, assure us that you are not a robot, and then click register. Once you do that, you will receive an email from the Covestro Pittsburgh Regional Science and Engineering Fair. This email will most likely land in your junk mail folder, and the link will not be active until you move it to your inbox. So make sure you click on the little button that moves it over to your inbox, and then you'll be able to complete your registration by setting your password. So once you click on the link, it will take you to a screen to pick your password. The very bottom of the screen there, underneath the red reset password button, says password strength must be strong. It will tell you if your password is strong or not as you enter your password. So until that bottom thing says strong, it's not going to let you move forward setting your password. So keep an eye on that text at the bottom of the screen. Make sure your password is strong, and once those two passwords match, you can click Reset Password, and it will take you to the sign-in screen where you started when you typed in stemisphere.org/PRSEF. So this is where you'll start every other time you need to access the database. You'll enter your email address and your password, click Log In, and the very first time you log in, you'll need to register your school. So you'll see a screen that looks like this. You will click on the downward facing arrow in the search school box. And from there, you can type part or all of the name of your school, and you'll see schools will appear in a drop-down menu. If your school is not in that drop-down menu, please send me an email and I will add it for you. It really should be there if you're teaching for a public school. We're pretty thorough in our search of all the public schools within our area. If you're teaching for a charter school or a small private school, or you have a homeschool, your school might not be in that list yet, but I can easily add it for you. So select your school there, and then the database will bring up a screen with the school's address and all of the contact information. So scroll down through that screen, make sure that everything is correct. If anything is not correct, you can edit it there. And at the bottom, you can register your school, and it will take you to a screen that looks like this, where you'll have your school's name, next to it a button that says Edit, so you can go back in and change your phone number or any other information about your school you need to change. And you'll see Manage Teacher underneath that, which should have your email address. So you can click on Edit next to your email address to make sure all of your contact information is correct. So make sure we have a good phone number for you. If you could give us 2 different email addresses, just in case we can't get through to one of them, that would be fantastic. Then click on Update Teacher, and you will be ready to go. So the next thing we'll need to do is register our students. That part of the database is still under development, but is scheduled to open on November 1st. So from there, you'll be able to add or edit student contact information. The students who came to the fair with your school last year should be available in the database with their addresses and birthdays and all the information we had about them last year. Students who are new to your school or new to the fair, you will need to start from scratch and enter all of the information that you had to enter last year for all of your students. You'll need to give us some information up front, like the project title, the category, and if they are a team or individual project, to get them into the system. So after that, the system will give you a series of questions about the topic of the study and the scope of the project, which will help to generate a list of required forms. So you won't need to decide on your own if you need Form 4 for human participants. That list of questions should pretty accurately generate the list of forms that you need. And then those forms will be listed next to the student's name in your teacher's view, so you can click on each one, enter the required information to populate that form, and then generate secure links for required signatures. So there will also be a color code to let you know the status of each form. I haven't nailed down the colors yet, but the statuses will be something like the form is required but not submitted yet, the form has been submitted but not signed, the form is approved, or the form has been reviewed and needs something else done to it. So hopefully that will be a nice quick way to monitor the progress all of your students are making toward getting their projects approved. So a note down at the bottom there, please do not mail student registration forms or safety review forms to the fair office this year. We are going to do all of this in the database and hopefully have a much more streamlined and efficient process. So that's all I have for the registration process and my overview. I'm going to unmute Janet so she can talk about our safety review process and how to make those projects get approved the first time around. All right, Janet, you should be unmuted and able to talk.
Okay, I think I am.
Yes, you
told
are.
Me I was. Good. Okay, once you get the forms in, that really define what your student's project is, all those forms go to the scientific review committee. And the question parents always ask is, why do we review projects? Well, we first of all want to protect the rights and welfare of the student researchers and human subjects. So we're looking for safety issues. We want to protect the health and well-being of the vertebrate animal subjects. We generally don't get a lot of vertebrate animal subjects in our local fair, but we want to make sure that should some student be using their dog as their subject of their research, that the health and well-being of that animal is ensured. We want to make sure that safe laboratory practices are used, and we want to address environmental concerns as well. A big thing is we want to provide consistency with the Intel ISEF rules and requirements. And we want to make sure that we follow applicable rules and regulations governing research. Those last two are most important when we're dealing with our senior projects. Generally in the junior and intermediate areas, we don't really run into too many issues with those kinds of things. But we do review all the projects. Every project that is submitted to PRSEF is reviewed by the SRC. Next, Nikki. Okay, what do we look for? We look for evidence of proper supervision. We don't want students doing, particularly if they're doing something that is inherently dangerous, to be doing it without supervision of some adult. We want to make sure that all the forms are completed, that the research dates and pre-approval dates are filled in, that those forms are signed where it's appropriate to be signed. If it's a team project, we want to make sure that there's evidence of proper team composition, that all of the students in a team know all about the project, and it's not just one student who's done all the work and the other one or two are on for the ride. We look for compliance with the rules and laws governing research involving humans, animals, potentially hazardous biological agents, or hazardous chemicals, activities, or devices. So we want to make sure that all those rules are followed. We want to see that there's compliance with ISEF ethics statements, use of accepted and appropriate research techniques, evidence that risks have been properly assessed, evidence of the search for alternatives to animal use. If you are doing a project with vertebrate animals, is there a better way or a different way you could have done it? Humane treatment of animals, documentation of substantial expansion for continuation projects. Again, this is generally something that we see later on with students because a continuation project implies that students have been at the fair previously and have done similar, if not identical, project to what they're doing now. And we also want to look for evidence of appropriate literature search and attribution, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but what that means. Okay, forms that are required for all projects. The first form is a checklist for the adult sponsor. The adult sponsor is the teacher. It is not the parent, it is the teacher. There is another form for parent approval. Form 1A is the student checklist. It's where the student tells us a little bit about where they're doing the project, when they plan on starting it, and a little bit about it. The research plan should be attached to the student checklist. We will have a place in the database where all of the information that should be in the research plan will be stored. The student will be able to either type directly into the fields in the database, or they can cut and paste from a Word document that they have. It must include a detailed description of research and at least 5 references. The 5 references should be listed in a recognized format. And one of our big problems that we've had every year is URLs alone are not acceptable as references. We tell parents this, we tell teachers this, we tell the students this. It is not our job as reviewers to go out and find your reference just based on a URL. It should have the same format as any other reference that you cite, but it can include the URL, but it cannot just have the URL. Form 1B is your parent and guardian approval form. That's where the parent signs off that they're okay with the child doing this particular work. Form 3 we are requiring now from all projects is the risk assessment form. Even if there is no or limited risk, we want the students to get in the habit of filling out the risk assessment, that they have thought about problems that might occur when they're doing their research and how they will deal with them if they do occur. And last but not least, a student registration form, which is basically the beginning form that you're going to fill out when you register a student. That's the information where you say what category you want this project to be in, what the age level is, those kinds of basic things about the project as it gets put into the system. Okay, specialty forms. These are ones that are required for projects that have particular subject matter. Form 1C is the regulated research institution. If a student is doing their work in a college lab, in a company lab, anything that could be considered a regulated research institution, they must fill out Form 1C, but it does not have to be submitted until after their experimentation is done. Form 2 is the qualified scientist form. It's required for all projects involving human participants, vertebrates, and potentially dangerous or hazardous biological agents or hazardous substances and devices. Okay, so if you need to have any of the following forms, you also need a Form 2. Form 4 is a form for human participants. It basically asks you to look for, to have your organization where you are doing your research. Is it your school? It's asking them to look at your research and determining whether it is safe for the human participants. You also need to have an informed consent form for your human participants. There's a sample available. You do not have to use that sample. You can make up your own informed consent, but you have to have an informed consent form if human participants are the subject of your research. Form 5A and 5B are for vertebrate animals. The 5A is for animals where you're conducting the research at school, home, or field. The vertebrate animals on 5B, that research is conducted at a regulated research institution. 6A is for potentially hazardous biological agents. That will be for anything that is, I don't really want to define that too much, because just looking at the biological agents, you're talking bacteria, mostly that's what we see, but it could be other things too. Form 6B is if you're doing research that involves human and or vertebrate animal tissue. Form 7 is required if this is a continuation project, if you are continuing on research that you did in previous years. Okay, so now we get to what the common problems are. These are the things that get your paperwork sent back for review, for revision. An incomplete research plan, a plan that doesn't tell us what you are doing. We need to know what you are doing so we can assess the safety and the appropriateness of the research that you're conducting. Incomplete, missing, or improperly formatted references. As I said before, You must have properly formatted references, and they must have 5 of them. Out of order approval dates. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Missing or incomplete forms for studies following the 4 things I just talked about. So if you're missing a Form 4, but you've got human participants, then you've got to provide that form. Okay. When I talk about next, okay, we talked about an incomplete research plan. The research plan should include these 5 things. It should have a rationale. It doesn't have to be long, but just a short background and why the research is important. It should include the research question and the hypothesis, or an engineering goal and expected outcomes. The big thing that really must be there is the procedure. It must be detailed enough so that we understand what you're doing. Especially, we want to know how you're collecting data. Risk and safety must have a list of potential risks and safety precautions needed. You could pick this information up from your research plan and put it right onto the Form 3. But it should really be in both places, because the research plan should really stand on its own without the support of any of the other forms. And then the data analysis. You should have the procedure that you'll use to analyze the data and the results. Okay, your bibliography must be included in the research plan. We keep emphasizing this because this is a big, big issue with the people who sit on the SRC. It must be included in the research plan, at least 5 major references. For example, science journal articles, books, internet sites, peer-reviewed journals. Okay, Wikipedia and Google are not acceptable as references. Wikipedia, as I tell my students when I go out and do a workshop for students, is a starting place. It is not the place you should end. If you go to the bottom of any scientific article in Wikipedia, it'll give you a list of references. Those are the references you want to use. Okay, if you plan to use vertebrate animals, one of the references must be in animal care. And a lot of this information is in the Teachers and Students Handbook, so you can go and find that. I have a link to that somewhere in this presentation. You can go and find this Teachers and Students Handbook, and it will give you a little bit more information. Use that APA or MLA format. There are several formats that are acceptable. Mostly what you want is the journal, book, internet site, the author, the title of the article that you're referencing, and where you found it. It's okay to find it online, but you need to have all that other information too. Okay. Approval dates is a big problem. Experimentation date, which is on Form 1A, and that's the one that the student fills out, must be after all approval dates. At a minimum, it must be later than the dates on Forms 1, 1B, and 3, and 2, 4, 5AB, A and B, and 6A and B if those forms are required. The new process should prevent the entry of incorrect dates. But I know somebody's going to try and put in wrong ones, so there will be error messages. It tells you just this thing. You're not supposed to start experimentation until you have approval to do your experimentation. Okay. Pre-approval is required by the SRC for anything that involves potentially hazardous biological agents, as I said, bacteria, human participants, hazardous chemicals, activities, or devices, and vertebrate animals. That's what's required. Okay. Okay, you can get the teacher and student guidebook like that at that URL, the first one. The second one is the PRSEF rules for all projects. And the last one is a similar one. The first one is actually a condensation. It doesn't have as detailed information as the last one, which is the complete rules for ISEF, which is the rules that we follow for PRSEF. If you have any questions at all, Nikki knows how to get a hold of me. Okay.
All right, thank you, Janet. And next up is Chuck. If you are on the same line as Janet, Chuck, you should be able to speak now.
Am I allowed to speak?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, Miss Nikki.
You're welcome.
So PRSEF, and it's not PRSEF, it's PRSEF, is a regional science competition for grades 6 to 12, and we cover the western portion of Pennsylvania and Garrett County, Maryland. And Nikki mentioned this, but we have about 1,000 students each year in grades 6 to 12. Roughly 375 are high school students. And we are affiliated with the Society for Science and the Public, and they run the International Science and Engineering Fair. And students who attend ISEF are selected from affiliated fairs such as PRSEF. And so normally we send 4 students from PRSEF to ISEF every year. We could send more. We don't really have enough money for more, but in the right circumstances, we could find a way. The next slide. Hello, next slide. There we go. So ISEF is the world's largest and most prestigious science competition for high school students. Last year, they had 1,845 students from 75 countries, regions, and territories. That was a record. And of course, they had 4 for PRSEF from Pittsburgh here, from the Pittsburgh region. And students who get selected to attend ISEF get a free trip, among other things. But to go to ISEF, you get a free trip. And in 2020, that trip will take you to Anaheim, California, and you will be right across the street from Disneyland. Yeah, this is the sad part about it being muted. I can't get those reactions from folks. So let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, okay. So attending ISEF is the highlight of high school for most of the students, and we call them finalists. So, you get the opportunity to compete for cash and for prizes and for scholarships, and you're competing with the best and brightest students in the world. And one of our favorite stories here is about a young man named Ryan who competed at PRSEF here, and he got a half of a scholarship to go to WVU. And lo and behold, he wanted to go to WVU. He went to ISEF. He won a 4th award. But also, people from West Virginia saw him there and said, "We want you to come to our school." And and he said, "Well, I already have half a scholarship." Well, they gave him the other half. So he got 4 years completely free to West Virginia University. And the top prize there is $75,000, but even a 4th award is worth $750. And so, but ISEF is just more than a competition. It's an opportunity to meet students who are just like you from all around the world. There are symposia also, including with the Nobel laureates. There are social functions, cultural enrichment, and just plain fun. And so next slide. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Everyone who wants to go to ISEF completes a PRSEF application. So if you're in PRSEF, you have to complete an application. In order to be selected to attend ISEF, you need to fill out an additional application. It's just pretty simple. And you must also write a research paper. So the research that you've already done maybe already even exists in a paper or will be written as a paper, but you must write a proper research paper which must be submitted. And the paper is in the form of a publishable paper. And ideally, it should be publishable quality research. You know, but every paper then is submitted and it's read, and then those that are deemed ISEF worthy from the first reading are sent to specialists who also read them and do additional evaluation. And finally, then, there are 10 or 15 papers are selected for further evaluation. And we have a team of judges who go around and talk to the students and look at their boards, you know, and evaluate their work. And often the students may figure out that this isn't their regular judge or may not, because there's not a badge on them saying, I'm judging ISEF. We don't, you know, nobody gets any special or different treatment. And in fact, if the student asks, we'll answer accurately, but we won't tell you. I will go look at some projects myself. And finally, four are selected. Four of all the people submitted are selected to go to ISEF. We had about 72 papers submitted last year, 72 people plus teams who wanted to go to ISEF. We had, I think, a dozen who we reviewed on Fair Day, and we selected four very good students, by the way, who went. And here, I want to stop for a moment and say our students did okay at ISEF, and over the years have done okay. They've won some prizes, but you know, we can always do better. And you know, one of the things, you know, I would say a good reference for you to judge the quality of your project is to go out to look at abstracts from students who've won at ISEF. And there is a database online at Society for Science in the Public called abstracts.societyforscience.org. And there you'll be able to find every abstract for the last 5 or 6 years. Plus, you'll be able if you want to just look at the award winners in the category that you're interested in, you can go and look at those. And so you can see what people did that won awards. You can also see the top award, the $75,000 award there. So, the judging process for PRSEF and ISEF are similar. In fact, again, if a PRSEF or an ISEF, you know, and this is whether you're talking about judging here in Pittsburgh for people to go, or people who are just being part of a PRSEF, or people who are in ISEF. The judges look at your board without you being present. They formulate questions. And then the second part of that, then you are then interviewed by that same judge. And so at ISEF, all students receive a 15-minute interview. But at PRSEF, this may run anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the project and the judge and how many questions they have. And a group of judges will review all the projects. So you will have more than one judge look at your project, both at PRSEF and at ISEF. And then the judges caucus to form a consensus as to which projects get awards. And that's how it's done. I guess next slide here. Okay, I think I might have mentioned this, but for ISEF, then specifically, the judging process starts weeks ahead of time with your paper. So if what you've done kind of is not in your paper, you're not going to make it to the next review. And again, your paper should look like a research paper in a journal. And you should have consulted scholarly journals in formulating your research and getting background. So you should be familiar with what real research papers look like. And you really, really, really want to do proper references. You know, and you can look in the student handbook to find how to do references, or look at the journals. Look at the papers that you looked at in order to do your background work. And we said wiki is not a reference, but you may use wiki to find a reference. And indeed, a URL is not a reference. In fact, URLs are really, even if you use the internet, not often required as in a reference. So let's just assume the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, is a print journal, but lots of people read it online. If you read JAMA and you read it online, you should use the reference for the print journal, because that reference will be there. You don't even need to say, oh, here's the URL, I read this online. It's completely irrelevant. But if you got a publication from the Environmental Protection Agency on let's say on a pesticide, and it's not a printed journal, then you would write the name, the author, the agency, the all complete reference, and then you would put the URL at the end, because it's only available online. And this is really crucial, because right now I am, but it's always been this way, the chair of the process reviews all the papers. So I read every paper, but one of the first things I do is look carefully at the references. So this is kind of this is your first impression, and it was like the references look pretty shady, and so that's you're already starting off on a bad foot. So then the judge will come and review your board first. They will look at the purpose and hypothesis, or the engineering goal and the conclusion. One of the first things a good judge will do is they say, do these things all make sense? Do they match? Is your experiment like a cohesive whole? So somebody someone gives a hypothesis, and then you look at their conclusion, and the conclusion doesn't have anything to do with the hypothesis. That's a red flag that there's something wrong with this project. And I guess now we're on to the next slide. There we go. Oh, okay. So that's the research paper structure. And we need the next slide. That's the next. We've already talked about. There we go. So what is it that judges look for? And the questions you need to ask yourself as you begin your research. So we want creative ideas, something unique. Research is about finding new knowledge, creating new knowledge. Now, that doesn't say that every project at PRSEF is original, because most of them aren't. But if the judges see 6 projects that are all basically the same, then none of them are likely to win an award anywhere. So you want to find something, though, that represents, and this is the thing for students, represents your unique interest. If you have a project that is similar to some existing project that you've seen, can you put your own twist on it? Can you try to be clever or interesting? And work is really critical. You need to do the right amount of work. More samples are always better. And how many is enough depends on a number of things. If you do an experiment that takes weeks to perform, you might only do one run of that experiment. Although typically you should do 2 runs of any process, so to show that they are the results, that your methods and the results are reproducible. But if you're running a thing that takes a very, very long time, then you might only run it once. But if you did something that took a day to run, you might set it up 10 or 20 days and set it up and run and get that 10 or 20 sets of data from trials. Growing plants. Lots of people grow plants. That's a fine project. But a lower level student should probably grow, 20 or 30 plants. A high school plant student doing a plant experiment needs to do 100 more plants. Now, if you're growing huge plants, maybe you might want to do fewer. But typically, little bean pots or bean plants, do more than you think you should. Doing tests with other students, simple tests should include at least 10. You can't do your 5 people in your family and expect to win anything. And the whole tenor of this part of this presentation is about what it takes to win, or what it takes to do a good project. Everybody who does a project and has fun doing it, that's good. They're winners. We have a bunch of those students, and we want those students to come and compete and have fun. But if they want to do better, they want to do something that's going to impress people, they need to, to listen to this kind of information. So more is better. Again, simple tests and maybe 10 people. But if you're in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, you probably want to do at least 30, and you might want to do 50 or 100 if you're in high school, or more. I had a kid from the Pittsburgh Gifted program, a 5th grader, who had a survey, and he was doing it, and he went out went out and stood on the corner in Squirrel Hill and Lawrenceville and one other place, and he got results from 380 people. That was a good project. He got something that meant something. And if you're testing some physical factor, and I'll keep this simple because sometimes we have, especially in junior high and the 6th graders, they'll build cars and run them down a track. Okay, it's been done 100 times, but and they'll do 10 runs for each car. If and nobody's going to pay much attention to that. If you do 100 runs for each car, and those are pretty quick, that's one might actually get some attention. Someone might think you were serious. Now, if you're building something complicated, you can probably only build one. But if you're building something similar in an engineering context, then you can and probably should build and test several of them. And of course, no researcher should ever forget controls. So for some standard condition. So if you do your project then in a couple of hours, the judges will, any decent judge will see that, and you're not going to get a good score. Good research takes some commitment of time. And then we're going to finally, let's talk about analysis, because this is very important, and it's often ignored by the students. Your numbers tell the story. So did your experiment give you the correct numbers to test your hypothesis? In other words, did that data that you found, did that actually match what you said you were looking for? And often, again, you should have many trials of the same phenomenon so that your numbers are more meaningful. So 6th, 7th, and 8th graders should be able to report means, average values, and at minimum. I mean, you can run these things on Excel and get all kinds of good statistical analysis. And it's pretty straightforward that just about anybody should be able to understand. High school students should be, absolutely, minimum should be using some basic statistical analysis, like a t-test or a p-test, to look at the difference in the analysis of variance. Again, program calculators, even programs like Excel, will do a lot of things. Have the students go to the math teacher as a resource for statistical analysis so that you understand what you're doing in Excel. And finally, students should be clear about what you did, what you as the experimenter did, and what was done for you in the lab. So, if you did some tests, and we've had kids who've done some really good scientific research, and they ran their samples through a GCMS, and they didn't. Some ran them themselves. Some of them learned that we're able to, but you can't expect that every lab is going to let you use their expensive equipment. But if the lab ran those for you, that's fine. I also had kids who built the test stands, test jigs. And one was very nicely welded. And I had a 8th grader who I asked him, did someone build this for you? Because that's okay if your dad built this for you, because you're not expected to know how to weld. Oh no, my uncle's a welder. I had him teach me how to weld it, and I welded it. Again, not necessary, but impressive. So, next slide then. Okay, writing for your paper, for your board. Clear and simple. Clear and simple. Short and simple and to the point. And, when you're writing your conclusion, the first thing should be I found that aspirin cures cancer. If that's what your data says, I found that aspirin cures cancer, and then you can qualify. I found that aspirin cures cancer when you take it for 20 years every day in 100, 150 milligram dose. But you want to say what you did and then qualify it with the conditions. People shouldn't have to hunt for what you did. And you would be surprised. I get 2 paragraphs before somebody says, oh, yeah, this is what I found. No, the first thing in your conclusion should be, what did you find? I built the greatest rocket ever built. That's a conclusion. Don't qualify first. Figures and tables should always have titles and units. What are the units that you're measuring? And again, it should be, what did you do and what do you know? Let me just one more slide here. Boop. Talking to the judges. The judges are there. They're volunteering their time. They want to be there. So your student should be nervous. But good judges won't let you talk on and on. You should have a prepared talk that's around a minute plus or minus long. And it should start with, what did you find? What did you do? And then the judges will probably want to ask questions. If the judge doesn't ask questions, then have something more to say, like, oh, I chose this research topic because I have this general interest in the subject. This is what we did. Because you have to remember, the student is the expert in his or her own project, and they should have that confidence and talk up to the judge, and the judges will love you for it. And, I guess there's one last thing, and that's the last thing on the bottom of this slide. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. You can say maybe, oh, I don't know the answer, but I think it might be XYZ. That's that's okay, but you should admit that you don't know the answer to something. And, make sure you understand the underlying science. So if you're testing a pesticide, you should know what's in the pesticide, for example. If you were testing Roundup, what's in Roundup. Okay, so that's everything. And we're on to Tom.
I hope we all feel very well prepared to talk to our judges now. So our last speaker of the night is Tom Conroy, who's going to talk about how to put your project together so that you have that wonderful experience with the judges.
Okay, hi. So what I was going to talk about was primarily the preparation of the board, which, as you'll find out in a minute here, is pretty much the biggest part of the judging experience. Before I started, I just want to say that the science fair targets students from 6th grade all the way up to high school seniors. And so there's a lot of variation in the amount of information and experience they bring to the fair. And so what we're trying to do is encourage these students to get better and better as they go through their different research topics and prepare them for real life experiences. Because I tell you from my kids' experiences, this fair and then ISEF dramatically prepared them for college. So I really want to encourage everyone to get your students excited about it and get them involved, so that it really does prepare them for life's adventures. So anyway, for the younger students, you might want to start with a review of the scientific method. You want to get them interested in something that they are really interested in, because that's what's going to motivate them most to carry on the work, as Chuck described. And you really want to do more than just an afternoon's work. You want to do several weeks, probably, or maybe even a couple months if they can afford the time, to take an idea, a question that they have, investigate it, do some real research, and then prepare possibly an experiment and draw some conclusions from it. And so that's basically the scientific method. First, you identify why you're doing this. What is the purpose? What is a question that you are interested in? You go back and then you start looking what other people might have done to develop more information that can really direct your research. And then you make a guess as to what caused that particular thing to happen that you're interested in. And so then you might, this is where you might want to, you have to prove out that hypothesis. And so typically we design an experiment to do that. And so, you go off and figure out what your experiment's going to be, figure out how you're going to do it, and then go and execute. Finally, you're getting a bunch of data. You got to figure out what conclusions to draw from it, how to analyze it, use different approaches, different tools. It's very important you understand, at least to some level, what those tools are telling you. You can't just plug numbers into an Excel spreadsheet and say, yeah, I did this. That doesn't really score a lot, and it doesn't teach you a lot. But so you got to get a little bit deep into what the meaning and the methods that you're using. And then finally, draw a conclusion. And that's very important. Even if your hypothesis fails, it's still a very valid experiment. And that's something that the students should be encouraged. If they've gone through several months of work and their hypothesis was wrong, that's an acceptable project. As they say, Thomas Edison, 90% of his telephone calls failed before he finally got through. Or not, I'm sorry, Thomas Bell, before he finally was able to make the first phone call. So that's an acceptable way to learn. And so speaking of references, at the bottom I did my job and I put a reference to where I got the scientific steps. But as has been emphasized, we do want the students to go out and look through other people's research and get ideas, but then always provide proper credits. Okay, next slide. So the judging process has been a little bit codified. There's still a lot of interpretation and we rely on the judgment of the judges, but we have what we call rubrics in the student handbook that can be viewed by all the students just to get an idea of what the judges would be looking at and how they might weigh the different aspects. But if you look at the different criteria, there's scientific thought, experimental methods, what approach the student used to analyze the data, their visual presentation, which is the board, and then their oral presentation, which is how they interact with the judge. Okay? And so some of the do's and don'ts for the board. I'm going to show a couple examples following this, but just first verbally lay it out. There's basically three extremes. I only list two here, but they're well laid out. They're either overcrowded, or the other extreme, which I didn't really talk about, was there's nothing really there. There's insufficient information. So let's just talk about the first. Let's compare and contrast well laid out versus overcrowded. You have a logical layout, a nice flow that the judge can make his way through the board. Keep in mind that the first part of the judging process, the students are not present. The judges go to the board. They have a couple minutes to look at it, draw some idea of what the project's about, get some questions in their head, and then they do that for their assigned projects. And then when the students come in, they use that time to interrogate the students and try to see, either validate what's on the board or draw more information about the depth of their understanding of the project. So it's important that the project board can stand at least mostly on its own, so that the judges can actually draw those questions from it. It has to be readable. Okay. One of the biggest mistakes, I think, is the student wants to put their entire project on the board. We see projects that are, they're probably about 5 or 6 feet tall. They're up on a table, so the judge they can't even see the top of the board. They'll put multiple layers on it with different pages from the research document, thinking that the judge is going to have time to sit there and read it all. They don't. They only have a couple minutes they want to do a good job, but if there's too much information there, then they're just not going to be able to process it. It also has to be, you have to get a balance between flashiness and just good technical presentation. So you like to use some colors. You might want to use a nice different font, something more creative. Just make it without getting overboard, okay? Second thing is pictures are very important. You want to get a good balance of text and graphics. The old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words is very valid here. A photograph of the student doing a research or their procedure may avoid 25 steps listed on the board. So incorporate graphics, incorporate figures of data, and so forth. And the last thing is you really want to highlight the hypothesis and the conclusion, and the whole idea is to be able to draw, for the judge to be able to see that the conclusion can be supported. And so there has to be some basis for what the conclusion really was. So I'll give you two examples. Unfortunately, I didn't have any photographs of the projects, but this is just a way of visualizing it. So up top, so this, back up a step, the project board is a trifold poster board. They're available at any office supply store if you haven't gone through this before. The top is a header board where you put your project title. You notice I put a couple little graphics up there just to make it stand out a little bit. And then I have a flow here it doesn't have to follow this flow, but it just seemed like a nice thing to talk through. Right up front, in the middle, bold letters is what the problem is. What's your hypothesis? And then I always read right to left, so I start over on left to right, sorry. I started on the one side, and I start with my project overview, a couple of bullet points, or some way of describing the research, what I'm looking for in terms of variables. And then I went back to the middle, showing what the experiment was, what the procedure was, what kind of materials, what kind of flow chart I used, include some data, some observations, create some figures, and then finally draw some conclusions. And then down at the bottom somewhere, you really do need to have the references. They can be very small print, but they've got to be somewhere where you're using someone else's work. You got to give people credit where credit is due. And then the next slide is a garbled mess. This is where you're getting way too much information, and so as you can see, it's not even appealing. And so the judge looks at that. He's trying to draw conclusions from it, trying to draw questions, and he just gets lost in it. So that's what you want to avoid by putting too much information on the board. All right, and then finally, just some additional things. I guess just to emphasize, too much information actually hurts. There's just not enough time to go through, for the judge to go through a lot. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Very important that they can defend what's on the board. If they go into a lab, for example, and they use a piece of hardware that helps them, investigate their topic, they at least have to have an overview of what that piece of hardware does. They don't have to go into excruciating detail, but they at least got, it's more than just I went in there and I pushed a button and I got a picture. There has to be some depth of what that machine did. Math we're always looking for math. Even a simple average is useful. The older students should do better than that, but science is all about math also, so include it. Use the board to tell a story. What I like to always see is the students during the oral presentation, they'll stand in front of the board and they'll start pointing to important parts to emphasize their discussion. That really shows the judge that you know what you did, and you really want to emphasize that. So it helps connect the student with the judge a little bit better. References, again, emphasize that. And then finally, make sure they have fun. I mean, this is a learning opportunity that will take them through their life, and they need to enjoy it and not look at it as a, you know, punishment almost. It's something that they can have a lot of fun with, and they can actually win some pretty neat prizes if they follow through. That's all I was going to say.
All right, everyone. So that wraps up the formal planned part of our presentation today. We have some time for everyone to ask questions if you would like to. I've unmuted all of you who are on the phone, so you can speak up or you can type in the chat box, and we would all be thrilled to answer your questions.
That sounds like a Nikki question.
A Nikki question. I didn't hear anyone ask a question.
There was a chat.
In the chat.
In the chat,
About the fees.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I saw the new registration fees are based on the sum. Yeah, you can still bring more than 40 students. The registration fee is capped at $125. Yeah, we not limited the number of students. Anybody else? Questions about projects? Questions about registering?
I think it's Donna here. I think the most problematic thing I see is making sure that the students pick the right kind of project. And I know that somebody referenced someplace where we can go back and look at those projects. So I think that would be very helpful. But if you have any other information about, you know, how to guide your students in the project that they are picking, that would be appreciated.
So if you go
I guess let me say, I guess I'm going to talk.
All right, you go first, Jeff.
That was abstracts at abstracts.societyforscienceofthepublic.org, and that will give you the abstracts for every project that was at ISEF. You know,
2003, by the way.
Yeah. So it's till now, and then you can sort it by winning projects or not, you know, all projects or however you want. You can get the category and all of that you want. But I think, you know, it's difficult. I am actually beginning to. I want to look at, you know, how do we get better projects from students, and I'm just starting to look at that issue. But certainly, this is a way to look at, you know, like this is the bar, and you can see where the bar is set in terms of, you know, winning projects or even just getting the ISEF projects. But, you know, is it something that the student is really interested in, something they're passionate about, something, you know, that's part of their experience? And I would also say, though, that part of this is, you know, if somebody finds an interest in something, X, you know, they should go out into the world and see what the world knows about X. And like, okay, there's Dr. Smith at the University of Pittsburgh who's doing X. And, you know, call him up. Tell him, hey, I found your name on the internet. You're famous. I read your paper. You know, I'm interested in doing something with this. Can I come and work in your lab? You know, that some people are like, oh no, don't bother me. But a lot of them are like, oh, you read my paper. What did you think of my paper? And the student better be prepared to say what they thought. But still, you know, that kind of thing. Those are definitely some positives, some things that can be done.
Yeah, I think, this is Janet talking, I think that the big thing that Chuck just said is that students do well when they have a project that they're really interested in and they can get excited about. Now, that means for some of them, because they're doing a project just because they'll get a grade for it and they have to do it, they'll never get excited about their project. But then you've got the 10% or so that just get really, really excited. And I think that's one of the things that we have to keep encouraging, is getting kids to find their passion. And the passion may not be science per se, but there's always a scientific aspect to it. I tell the kids when I go out and do workshops, think about the things that they do when they're not in school, and what makes them really interested in that thing, and what questions do they have about that thing that they do? Is it music? Is it sports? Is it, I don't know, all kinds of things out there. And that's what I usually tell the kids. But it's tough. It really is.
It is. And the thing that will not do well is if you go to one of these sites that have, I think it's, Science Buddies or something like that, and you're looking for ideas that they're so simple and they've been done many, many times, and the students don't grasp hold of them, and so that really that's not a good way to do it. It's really, as Chuck and Jan just mentioned, it's the student walking home and wondering why their leaves are turning green, turning colors. Yep. And then go off and investigate that. It's just those kind of things that.
I see another question here that we need to answer, because you didn't mention it. What if the student wants to do an engineering project and the project idea doesn't necessarily answer a question, but instead fulfills a need? Would that be considered a hypothesis? No, it's not a hypothesis. It's an engineering problem, and that's perfectly acceptable.
There's a category called engineering.
Right. So engineering projects are the most misunderstood, but they tend to do really well.
I have this is only partially tongue-in-cheek. I assume most of the people on the call are teachers, but if you really don't understand engineering, find one of your friends who's an engineer, go buy him or her a beer, and sit around and talk about engineering, and that would be a big learning experience for you, and it only costs you $5 or $6 for a beer.
I do have a hard time with what the engineering project requirements are. Like, I looked at the stuff. There's all sorts of information on the science fair project requirements, but the engineering projects, it's just
There is a rubric for engineering projects, okay, which we put together and we're still using. So there is a rubric out there. There's also the one good thing that Science Buddies does have. Their projects aren't wonderful, but they actually have a flow chart that's similar to the scientific method for engineering projects. And that's really useful because engineering projects are iterative. They're not the same as science projects. And if anybody wants to, I'll be happy to.
You're typically building something versus looking for why something happened. That's probably the best distinction you can make.
That's sort of it.
Yeah.
But
Hey, there's another question we missed that was on when we say that we need an advanced statistical analysis for high school students. What does that entail? It's primarily going a little bit beyond just a simple average. But I would caution the students.
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I caution the students to make sure they understand whatever it is they choose to present. Standard deviations are great. The T fit is good and things like that, but they got to understand what they're doing.
And some of it's what is the appropriate way to analyze this data? Sometimes it's doing regression analysis, which is it's a become pretty standard. And I've seen high school students. It's not hard to run a regression analysis. It's harder to run some more advanced forms of regression analysis, but your basic and simple regression analysis. But people talk about ANOVA. What's ANOVA? And this drives me nuts. ANOVA is the analysis of variance. So why does my data has a variance, or if you want to even think of it as a standard deviation. My data has this. Is this meaningful? and you're analyzing, is this a meaningful difference, a statistically significant difference, or not? 3 is always greater than 2, but is it significantly more? And you're doing sort of even basic statistical analysis, basic ANOVA, if you will tell you if it's significant.
This brings up a good point. Tell the students it's all right to ask help from other people. I've had students say that they didn't think they were allowed to talk to their parents, so they never even asked them a question. And that's not the rules. It's involving people to better understand what you want to do. So it may be your dad, it may be the science teacher, it might be a university professor, but seek out the people that can really help you and try to draw information from them.
So that and we don't want students doing anything that's unsafe, so it's okay to have your dad run the saw.
Yeah.
They don't have to do it themselves. We don't want students to be hurt or hurting anybody else. So simple precautions just fine.
And actually, too, I have to say, like writing, if you're a high school student writing a paper for PRSEF, you get somebody to read your paper. I don't know how many people who are on this call have published papers. I have published papers. I have never published a paper that wasn't read by 2 or 3 or 4 other people before it was submitted. So that's perfectly legitimate. And it's even better if those people were from the University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon and they're experts in the field. Doesn't matter. That's always a good thing.
If we could return to the question about how to choose a good project and kind of the statistics for 1 second, both of those things are in the Student and Teacher Handbook, which can be found on our website. If you Google PRSEF, that's a really good way to find the Science Fair's website. If you click on Students and Teachers, all of your student and teacher resources will be there. And there's a handbook, which summarizes a lot of what we said today. But down in the appendixes, you'll see one about good projects to choose and projects to avoid. You'll also see several pages of ideas given to us by our sponsors. So what types of things they are interested, what they're doing research on, and giving your students ideas of things they might not have thought about as scientific topics, but which would make good projects and which might also get the attention of a sponsor judge as they're looking for students to give their awards to. All right, do we have any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I am going to put the recording of this webinar up on our website. So if any of your friends, co-teachers, co-workers, students, parents missed the webinar tonight and would like to watch all or part of it, they can find it on our website. And if you have any other questions, you know where to find me at Science Center. Send me an email or give me a call, and I would be happy to help you through whatever it is you're struggling with.
Great.
Thanks for being on the call.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you for the information.